Right, welcome back. We are still in chapter 3. We are at the end, the final clip before we finish chapter 3. So as we were saying, we were looking at some of the caution or points to note when you are interpreting the ratios. So we stopped in the last clip looking at the second point here. Let me just get the pointer. Okay, so the last point that we discussed in the previous clip was not to use the ratio to judge whether it is good or bad, whether it's good or bad for a company as a whole. So you cannot use just one ratio or a few ratios. So you have to do a comprehensive analysis before you can judge whether a company is good or bad, or better or worse than another company, or than previously. So you have to be more specific. The ratio may measure liquidity, then your judgment is just about liquidity, not about the overall performance or position of the company. Alright, then use ratios only to identify potential red flags. So these ratios are only to identify potential problems. Red flags here means problems, potential problems. These red flags may not actually be a symptom or a problem. So if you find that there is something different, the ratio is very different from the competitor or from previously, then it warrants or it requires further investigation. So we can't say immediately whether it's good or bad, but you need to investigate further. Alright, and in the ratio, high is not necessarily good and low is not necessarily bad, and vice versa. Low may not be good, not necessarily good, and high is not necessarily bad in some ratios. For example, I give an example of liquidity. So higher liquidity may mean less risk, less financial distress risk. Because you'll be able to make the payments when they become due, with current assets. But if you have high liquidity, this may also mean low return, because the company is having a lot of assets, as current assets, and these current assets give very poor return. Yield here means return. If you had invested the funds in fixed assets, then this can be used to generate a higher return. So higher liquidity may mean less risk, but it also means less risk return, as we have seen in the first chapter. Alright, so you need to look at the ratio. Higher ratio may not necessarily mean good, because it has some good aspects and may be traded off with some bad aspects as well. So you must consider both. Alright, there are no fixed universal best benchmark ratios to be attained. For most ratios, you can't state clearly, if it is this ratio, let's say 2.5, then it's good, and if it's beyond 2.5, then it's bad. There's no such benchmark. So it requires a lot of judgment and a lot of experience, before you can say that the ratio indicates some improvement or some worsening or deterioration in performance or position, financial position of a company. Alright, so, and this benchmark, even if you, there may be some ratios that have benchmarks, but these benchmarks will depend on the industry norm. And this may change from the industry to industry, and it may also change based on economic activity, and it may change over time. So this is quite dynamic. It's not static. So therefore, you have to interpret the ratios with some caution. Alright, any ratio should be seen as a prompt for further probing. That means you must ask more questions. Especially when the ratio diverges. Diverges here means it changes significantly from prior years or from other competitors' ratios. When a ratio is very different from a competitor, or it is very different from previous year, then that is possibly a point where you need to investigate further. So it's a prompt for further probing. Right, and a ratio is actually, as I mentioned earlier, it's actually a fraction. which may be high or low, yeah, and this will depend on the numerator and the denominator. So you need to look at both, yeah. So when the numerator is higher than the denominator, then the ratio would be high, yeah. If the numerator is lower than the denominator, then the ratio would be lower. That's the basic idea, yeah. But when we say numerator is higher, okay, so the number, yeah, the numerator may be higher compared to previous year or compared to the competitor, yeah. So we don't look at the numerator in absolute terms, yeah, but we look at the numerator in relative terms, relative or compared to the denominator. Okay, so this is important, yeah. So it's a relative measure, yeah. Ratio is always a relative measure which involves two figures, yeah, or two numbers. So you need to consider both, yeah, not only one, yeah. So for each ratio, explore both possibilities, okay, or changes in both the numerator and the denominator, and take note of possible interpretations. How do you interpret? Yeah, you don't only consider, yeah, an interpretation based on the numerator alone, yeah, and the denominator alone, yeah. So you need to consider both. Okay, so you look at related ratios and then come up with the interpretation, yeah. And to eliminate wrong interpretation, what you need to do is check with the absolute values. Okay, don't only look at the ratios, you must also look at the change in the absolute values over time, or not only change in the absolute values, but look at the absolute values between two companies, for example, yeah. Okay, the company and the competitor, yeah, you need to look at the absolute values. Then you also compare with other, yeah, related interpretations from other ratios. Okay, then with comprehensive analysis, that means you look at many ratios, both the competitor and previous years, then a set of correct interpretations will emerge, yeah. So an interpretation may be a possible interpretation. There may be two, yeah, competing possible interpretation. But since other ratios also give similar, yeah, interpretations, some may not be similar. So those that are not similar, you can drop, yeah. So some abiding, yeah, or what do you call interpretations may be reinforced by other ratios, yeah. So you stick to those interpretations, yeah. This is what we mean by a set of correct interpretations will emerge, yeah, with a comprehensive analysis. Alright, in order to strengthen the analysis, you should also use the statement of cash flows, and the information from the statement of cash flows. Look at how the cash flows are generated and how the cash flows are used. So this will give a proper perspective to your ratio analysis. Then also use time series analysis, meaning over time, and also peer analysis, yeah, compare with competitors, yeah, or the industry average. Okay, so those are the cautions, yeah, that you need to exercise when you are doing ratio analysis, and this is very useful when you do your project paper, yeah, both individually, okay, as well as a group, yeah. When you do individually, try and make sure that you follow, yeah, the caution, yeah. Make sure that you exercise caution when you are interpreting the ratios, yeah. Alright, so this is the end, okay, of the chapter. So it's a review, yeah. This quick quiz is a review of what we have covered so far. So there are 5 major parts. Okay, the first part talks about the statement of cash flows, yeah. So we learn about cash flow and how we can derive the statement of cash flows, okay. So, and how we can determine sources or uses of cash, yeah. The source or use of cash will depend on whether an item is an asset or a liability or equity in the balance sheet, and on the item increasing or decreasing over time, yeah. If it increases, okay, if it's an asset item, if it increases, then it is a use of cash, okay. So based on that, that's how you interpret, yeah, the sources and uses of cash, and this will be used in deriving, yeah, the statement of cash flows. Then the second part is about standardizing, yeah, the financial statement. So you can standardize the balance sheet and also standardize the income statement. Okay, so This standardization can be performed using three methods. One is called common size, the other is common base year, and the third is a combination of common size and common base year. And why is this standardization useful? It makes comparison more meaningful, because you standardize the financial statements. Without standardizing, you cannot compare absolute values. Okay, you can only compare once you standardize. Okay, so what are the major categories of ratios? Okay, we have seen there are 5 categories of ratios. Okay, and we have learned how to compute each ratio and how to interpret those ratios. That is the third part, third key concept. And the fourth key concept in the chapter is about DuPont analysis. Okay, we have seen that also. That is not covered here in the quick quiz. Okay, and the last part of the chapter, the fifth key concept, is about the problems associated with financial statement analysis. So you need to exercise caution when you are interpreting the ratios. Okay, so with that we finish this chapter and we go to this comprehensive problem. So this problem, okay, there is this company XYZ Corporation. The information is given here: sales, profit margin, PM stands for profit margin, CA is current assets, FA stands for fixed assets, and NWC is net working capital, and LTD is long-term debt. Now you need to compute ROE using the DuPont analysis. So how do you compute ROE? What is ROE? ROE is return on equity. But the question gives you this hint. You use the DuPont analysis. DuPont analysis, okay, is breaking up ROE into 3 components. Okay, which is this. This is the DuPont analysis. ROE is equals to net income divided by sales, multiplied by sales over total assets, and then multiplied by total assets over equity. Now, net income over sales is actually profit margin. Sales over total assets. Sales is given here 8 million. Total assets is actually a combination of fixed assets and current assets. So that is known. Total assets is known, given. Then here total assets is just a combination of these two, but equity is not given directly, but you are given long-term debt. You're also given net working capital. So first you need to compute the current liabilities. Okay, CA minus net working capital, you get the current liability. If CA is 2 million, net working capital is 1 million, so current liability must also be 1 million. So we know that. So current liability plus long-term debt will be 4 million. And here your total assets is 8 million, right? 8 million minus 4 million, another 4 million will be your equity. So that's how you determine this. So you expand this net income over sales is net profit margin, that is given here directly in percentage terms. So this is 8%. Sales is given. Now total assets here is actually a combination of CA and FA, current assets and fixed assets. So TA or total assets is current assets plus fixed assets. Now equity, equity is how, this is how you derive equity, is total assets minus current liability minus long-term debt. So this is current liability. Okay, CA minus NWC is current liability. So you just replace all these symbols with the numbers. 8% multiplied by 8 million divided by 8 million here. Then 8 million over this 4 million. Therefore, you get 16%. Let me just push it down slightly. Okay, so you get 16% is your ROE. So that's how you solve this problem. Okay, so with that we finish this topic. Okay, so we'll end this video here. So with that we finish this chapter 3. So the next clip will be on chapter 4. Okay, and that will be made available later. Okay, thank you.